thoughtful ideas, suggestions for guests and topics.
Great events, programs, and
Welcome to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. I'm your host, Lawrence Payne. To our regular viewing audience, welcome. To those joining us perhaps for the first time here for ACC's TV Dialogue Houston, we're here now every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Again, on Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. As always, on top of the hour, let me thank you for your thoughtful calls, emails, and text messages concerning previous shows we've aired here on ACC's TV Dialogue Houston, where after all, this is your community affairs, public affairs show, now proudly in its 27th season. We look forward to bringing you great programming and great guests around a myriad of topics and subjects that cover the wonderful life of Houston that's going on around us. And today is no exception. We have two great guests, and we're going to just go ahead and jump in because we want to use the time wisely to have a full dialogue with both of them. The first show is our good friend, Dr. Stuart Squires, who is the Associate Director for the Center of Faith and Culture, University of St. Thomas. He is also an associate professor of theology at the wonderful University of St. Thomas, and we're just so glad to have him join us here. And Stuart, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, Larry.
And before I dive in, I'm just going to give you a chance to tell our wonderful viewing audience a little bit about yourself, and then we're just going to kind of jump into this. So go right ahead, sir, please.
This is my second year. I moved to Houston just over a year ago. I'm still excited to be here. As you said, I work in the Center for Faith and Culture at the University of St. Thomas. I'm in charge of a master's program, Master's of Arts in Faith and Culture, that is designed to give any of our students, all of our students, whether they're Christians or Catholics or any religious tradition, grounding in the Christian intellectual tradition, and also the second hat that we wear as Americans, understanding American history, American culture, so that we can go out into this dominant American culture and be a prophetic voice.
And I'm going to start right there where you left off with the prophetic voice, and let you tell us a little bit about that wonderful book you have written, because I'm just fascinated by the title, the second part of the title, because I want to jump into that because I think it leads and lends the good predicate to where we are in today's times going forward, even though it's an historical piece about the 4th and 5th century. So go right ahead, please.
So my book is called The Pelagian Controversy, which for most people, it's kind of an obscure theological controversy that happened in the early 5th century, so quite a while ago. It did deal with several people that are really important for the history of Christianity. St. Augustine of Hippo, who is, for example, who is one of the most important figures in the history of Christianity and really Western civilization as a whole. The controversy itself deals with a variety of issues that fall under the umbrella that we call theological anthropology, which is a big fancy term that just simply deals with questions about the human person. Are we good or are we evil? Or are we both? Are we compelled to sin? Or if through the movement of our will, can we choose to be sinless? Now, a lot of to getting into your second point there, a lot of these issues certainly are not theological issues that are sort of hotly contested today in the pages of the New York Times. But as I say in the introduction of my book, I think this is important not just for historians or theologians of Christianity to know, because of course today a lot of the questions that we are fighting about in our public discourse today deal with these anthropological questions, that is, questions about the human person. So questions of what is marriage, sexuality, race, of course, all these questions about the human person. What does it mean to be a human person? So a lot of the specific issues are different back in the 5th century as today, but still dealing with this general question of who is a human person, what does it mean to be a human person, and how should we act?
Well, let's pick up on that. And the other, I guess, part of the title of the book, which I love, is An Introduction to the Enemies of Grace and the Conspiracy of Lost Souls. Yeah. I just think that's so rich in there. unpack all of that is within itself a good discussion. But I want to pick up on the point you mentioned, because I think that's where we are today in society in 2020, all this going on around us. In this world of trying to understand human beings and the importance of the essence of life and the essence of human beings all being equal. And as you said, your perspective, your worldview and perspective, how you understand this in relation to other human beings. And it's part about who is good, evil, who is bad, who is caring. We're in such a quagmire, it seems right now, in trying to figure out our common humanity going forward and how we need to be in touch with that human being piece inside of all of us. Speak to that a little bit, if you will.
Yeah, I think you're right, Larry. This is sort of at the heart of our social discord today. And I think it's rooted in a variety of competing narratives, meta-narratives about certainly the human person, but creation, reality in general. So as Christians, I'm a Catholic theologian. The perspective that I come from is that we are all created in the image and likeness of God. And so grounded in this reality of the dignity of the human person and that all people are sacred. There are other competing views that would disagree with that. Albert Camus, in the mid-20th century, the French existentialist, described the human person as an animal that fornicates and reads the newspaper, right? In other words, we are animalistic like any other animal, and that the only thing that sets us apart is the idea that we read the newspaper, that we have an intellectual, a rational component. But there's no description there, again, as we as Christians would say, of being created in the image and likeness of God. So how you think about what the human person is or who the human person is then dictates a lot of these other more specific questions like sexuality or marriage, etc.
Well, since democracy depends on at least some buy-in to a definition of our common humanity together, and if we have these compelling worldviews that then shape how we understand the other human being, then we seem to be at odds just on the basic premise of who we are as a people. So therefore, these challenges we have about fullness of human beings being equal, fullness of human beings being afforded the same opportunities, that's the rub comes in right there before you even get to all the other issues of equity or anything else, right? Or equality.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that the competing meta-narratives is precisely at the root of our social discord today. And I'm not simply talking about the standard conversation that people like to have about, left versus right politics.
Right,
this is
right,
a wider and deeper issue. And I think the solution that is proposed to us, and I don't think it's necessarily the best one, but because what you're getting at, Larry, the solution then is sort of a relativism, right? That I'll believe,
right.
my Catholic belief, and the French existentialists can believe their belief, and the best that we can do is to sort of agree to disagree and agree to respect each other, and then we go our separate ways, which then leads to a lot of problems, including a lack of dialogue, which of course you are dedicated to dialogue. We in the Center for Faith and Culture are committed to dialogue. And this is a problem that we're having in our society today. We just don't know how to have a good dialogue.
No, we don't. And then the core of a basic dialogue is the relationships of mutual trust and respect, as we both know, because nothing happens without trust. Relationships built on mutual trust and respect, because nothing happens without trust. And what you said, the reality is, if we just agree to disagree and go our separate ways, and then fake that we respect each other, what is really happening is not respect, as we see, is tolerance. And unfortunately, we've taught tolerance as the lowest bar of being okay with another human being. And I've always said this for years. I tolerate the roaches, ants, the mosquitoes, and the heat. I never want to put a human being on the same level of something I just tolerate and never gonna accept. So this issue of accepting the other human being as truly another human being, we're so far away from that. And we've talked about diversity trying to help us to get there, and implicit bias training and all those things, which doesn't work. I can tell you, I've been doing diversity training, implicit bias training for 30, 40 years. It doesn't work. So the question becomes moving from tolerance to acceptance. moving from, as you and I talked about when you first arrived at St. Thomas at the center, understanding that diversity is wonderful, but there's something beyond diversity, which is how do we live in a pluralistic society, in a pluralistic world, in a pluralistic reality, and that we have to figure out how we navigate in that pluralistic reality for ourselves and how we are therefore. And I think that's still the challenge. And that's why I think it's so important we have these kind of dialogues.
Yeah, I think you're right. That is the heart of our challenge today. I agree with you 100% on problems of tolerance. Pope Benedict XVI spoke and continues to speak really quite eloquently on this, that to say that I tolerate you and you tolerate me is to, first of all, come to the assumption that there are differences. Whereas, again, this sort of postmodern culture that we live in often says that, well, there are no differences. There are no differences between, for example, genders, that the differences simply are what we perform or choose to perform. And so you have this sort of, and this is Benedict's term, a sort of a schizophrenia, not in the clinical health sense, but in the sort of metaphysical sense of on the one hand, saying, we need to tolerate each other, which again implicitly says that there's a difference, while at the same time saying, well, there's no difference between any of us. We're all the same. And so this sort of again, it gets to the heart of the complexity of trying to have a dialogue and an agreement. I think one place that we just have to get to, and I'm not sure exactly how to do that, but that is again to come to a universal conclusion that there are certain moral truths, and not just moral truths, but truths in general, that not all truths are subjective, not all truths are relative. You know, St. Augustine in the 4th century had to deal with this with the academic skeptics, and he said that, you know what, there are certain things that we can all agree on. They may not be sort of large T capital truths, but, you know, mathematics, we all agree 2 + 2 = 4. We all agree with the principle of non-contradiction. There is either one moon in the sky or there are no moons in the sky, but we can't say both, right? The principle of non-contradiction. So I think we as a society, especially in America, come to foundational objective truths and then use that as a springboard to go on to, again, healthy dialogue.
So how do we and I'm just going to say, because we are talking about a Catholic universities present, I would be saying the same thing if it was Houston Baptist University. How do we get to the point where we raise the bar of the dialogue around asking the basic question, what is the fair and ethical treatment of all human beings? What is the fair, ethical, moral treatment of all human beings? All human beings' lives matter. All human beings are equal. We have not had that conversation as a society, as a people. It seems to me one of the challenges of a great urban Catholic university is to maybe have that conversation, which I'm talking to our wonderful president, Dr. Ludwig, about doing through another Zoom thing there on campus in the new Maximilian Kolbe studio, because I think that's where we're headed. What I hear you saying more and more, Houston prides itself on being a community of wonderful faith leaders, which we have, which we do, about working together, which we do, both ecumenically and interfaith. But if I worship Friday, Saturday, Sunday, church, parish, temple, synagogue, or mosque, what you said earlier, we all have a basic within who we are about how we think about human beings. That thread is in every denomination and every creed. It would seem that it would be not too difficult to come to some understanding, apart from the political thing you mentioned, left or right, conservative or liberal, Democratic, Republic, on what does that basic level looks like? What's the baseline of how we expect all beings to be treated fair and equally? We can't seem to have that conversation. We haven't been willing to have that conversation because I think it makes us look at all the things socially, economically, et cetera, of why that hasn't happened and why some will say it can't happen. But I think it's a great challenge to be able to maybe have that dialogue.
And I think in particular that dialogue needs to happen in multiple spheres, but in particular, it should be universities that lead that conversation.
Right.
We've seen failures of the news media, of social media. Our politicians are completely incapable of having these conversations. And I think the place where this needs to happen is in universities, certainly Catholic universities, but even our secular universities. We in the Center for Faith and Culture, this is one of our missions. You, Larry, were our great master of ceremonies last fall for our symposium on the U.S. Bishop's document on racism, and I think that was a resounding success. So this is part of what we in the Center for Faith and Culture are trying to do. But I want to challenge, other universities to step up. I think we in higher education have gotten too comfortable with that sort of standard ivory tower. We sit in our classrooms and we kick around ideas with our students, and we become insulated. And part of the role of the university, yes, is for our students because they're paying tuition dollars, but we are a part of and need to engage more deeply with the communities around us. And so I think we universities need to step up and lead that conversation. And I don't think it's really happening right now.
We're having a fascinating conversation with our good friend, Dr. Stuart Squires from the University of St. Thomas Center for Faith and Culture. And we've been talking about humanity, about democracy, about change, about what kind of America we want going forward. Now, to help us get there, it is a process of conscious formation. It is the process of intentionality and mindfulness going forward about how and what allows me to shape my understanding of the world, shape my understanding of the other, shape my understanding of how I'm supposed to in that world. And part of that is that conscious formation. So tell us a little bit, Dr. Squires, how we see and how we get to that conscious formation.
Yeah, so certainly as a Christian, I could offer a variety of answers about, immersing yourself in Scripture and the tradition of the church, and that would be helpful for us Christians. But I think, again, to this idea of dialoguing with people outside of yourselves, we have to have a common base of conversation. And so one thing that we can point to that is has been around for thousands of years in the Western tradition, Christian or not, is the idea of the virtues. We can go back most importantly to the Greek philosopher Aristotle, the pre-Christian Greek philosopher, and he talked in his Nicomachean Ethics, talked about virtues, the development and formation of virtues. Really quickly, we can talk about a virtue is a good habit as opposed to a vice, which is a bad habit. A good habit, the idea of a habit, not in the sense of, mindlessly chewing on your fingernails, but a habit is an action with intention. And again, in the Christian tradition, but outside the Christian tradition, we can talk about the four cardinal virtues. Cardinal is a funny word there, coming from the Latin word hinge, like the hinge of a door, right? The hinge is a very small thing, but it's the thing that allows the very big door to do what it needs to do, either stay on the door frame or to move in and out. So the four cardinal virtues, temperance, justice, fortitude, and prudence, are the sort of foundations of a moral life, again, whether you're a Christian or not. And I think if we, as a society, come together, we want to focus on those, developing those virtues, that I think this can be a beginning point, a common point that we can all have.
You want to walk us through each one of those four, because I've learned over the years, they mean different things to different people.
Sure, yeah, thank you. So the idea here is in the formation of conscience or the virtues, think of it like playing baseball, right? If you want to hit a home run in the World Series, you can't just show up on the day of the World Series and swing the bat. You'll strike out in 3 pitches. What you need to do is eat well, lift weights, swing the baseball bat 1,000 times a day, every day for 20 years. And then you can, when you show up in the World Series, not only can you hit a home run, but you can do so effortlessly. And that's the idea of the virtues, that we can develop these virtues and then live a moral life effortlessly. The first one we can talk about is justice, right? And of course, this is a big question today. What is justice, especially when we talk about social justice? Again, as a Christian, we actually adopt a definition that explicitly mentioned by Plato and Socrates, again, the pre-Christian Greek philosophers, of justice as giving to the other what is owed or due to him or her or a society. So that's a sort of baseline definition of what is justice. Again, the specific questions of whether we're talking about immigrants or we're talking about homeless or whoever it is, what is it that we owe them? But we do owe them something, because Aristotle talks about, we are a political or social animals, right? So we live in societies. So we do owe our neighbors something. And so when we talk about justice, what is it that we owe the other? Temperance is probably the most misunderstood term, because when we think about the temperance movement in the early 20th century, that has to do with not drinking alcohol at all. But temperance as a virtue means doing something well, we can say with moderation, right? So as Catholics, we don't have a problem with drinking alcohol, but it needs to be done temperately. It needs to be done well with moderation. And of course, what does that mean? Well, it depends on the given situation or the person, but moderation is a good way of talking about it. When we talk about the virtues, a virtue is a mean between the extremes, right? So in the question of alcohol, for example, again, the extremes would be sort of falling down drunkenness, and on the other would be, again, sort of a prudish snobbery against drinking alcohol at all. Fortitude, often a synonym for courage, right? The idea of being courageous as opposed to cowardly, or on the other extreme would be what we call foolhardiness, right? Sort of rushing into battle foolhardily, without a plan, without your fellow soldiers backing you up, right? That's not bravery, that's foolhardiness. And then finally, prudence, the idea of seeing the world as it actually is, number one, and then number two, developing or forming a plan, an action plan. So going out and executing justice, again, with seeing the world as it actually is. So, we can have 15-week semester courses on that. So I apologize if that's an overly reductionist setup.
Oh, it's a great Cliff Note version of it. Thank you. So in all of that formation of the virtues and all of that formation of consciousness leads us then to the question of citizenship. I love that title, faithful citizenship. And faithful citizenship can be from whatever your theological or denominational perspective is, right? You can be a Methodist and have faithful citizenship. You can be whatever. And I think that that's something, and again, the environment that we're in today is important for people to take into consideration. What does that term mean in how I exercise my right to vote, how I decide that what type of America I want, what kind of democracy I want, but it should be something that guides you and helps you in that formation to get to that point. Well, faithful citizenship.
Yeah, you're right. That we can have different definitions depending on the sort of the metaphysical view that we hold. Maybe to tweak it a little bit and just continue on with using Aristotle, who again, as non-Christian, we can use as a communal base. The term that he talks about after talking about these virtues is friendship, right? Friendship, which again, we all have friendships no matter what our metaphysical views are. He talks about different definitions or sort of different categories or levels of friendships, or the basic one is, for example, you work with your colleague and you're on a shared mission or shared goal as in the company that you work for. And that's kind of the basic definition, that you're not using each other in an exploitative sense, but you just have this common goal towards. But what Aristotle says is the highest level of friendship is the idea of love for the other and enjoying the other person for his or her own sake, right? Now, I'm not trying to get anything out of you. I'm not trying to use you to get a professional advancement on my part. And so I think maybe this can be, again, a sort of apolitical, non-sectarian way of thinking, or thinking through these larger social questions of friendship, right? Of being, as a Christian, Jesus would talk about loving your enemy, but Aristotle we could talk about being friends with the other and trying to strive and reach for that highest level of friendship, of truly enjoying and basking in the goodness of the other for his or her own sake.
All right, we're about out of time, but I want to make sure I leave time for you to plug and talk about your podcast. And I want to make sure people know that it exists and how and when they can participate.
Thank you. We have the Center for Faith and Culture has a podcast called Catholicism and Culture. We do episodes every other week, usually on Wednesdays. We're going to try to get you on, Larry. We want to talk to you about the African American Catholic experience. And every other week, we have a variety of conversations with different people about that larger question of faith and culture. So we've had interviews. I had a gentleman a couple weeks ago, the Maronite Catholic Church. Usually we just talk about the Roman Catholic Church, and we have a sort of tunnel vision about that's what it means to be Catholic. There are a variety of other ways of being Catholic, like the Maronite tradition. I've interviewed a philosopher at Rice University. Actually, we were talking about this question of Aristotle and the virtues. So the most recent episode was I interviewed a couple from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints about families. They have very strong families. How can we Catholics learn from the LDS community about how to create strong families?
Well, I think it's a great podcast. It's a great idea to do it. And it's open to everyone. It's just not Catholic. Just like the courses and the experience of the Center for Faith and Culture is also non-denominational. We've had a little bit of everyone come through there at one time or another, and we'll continue to do so. I want to thank you. We're just out of time. I'd love to carry this on. We could probably do this for another hour and talk about these issues. I want to thank again Dr. Stuart Squires from the University of St. Thomas Center for Faith and Culture for being our guest. Thank you, Stuart. We're going to follow up with you in the future to see kind of where all this kind of phase out and going forward.
Thank you for having me, Larry.
All right, let me close with these thoughts. As we know, we're in the season coming up soon of being able to do what our great friends in Minnesota and Virginia started today, and that is early voting. Early voting is coming our way very soon. I love the spirit of the people in line. The first two couples I interviewed this morning, both in Minnesota and in Virginia. Why are you standing in line? Why are you first? Because it is so important this year that not only that I vote, but that my vote counts and be counted. That is, and when they asked the lady how she came to that strong feeling this morning, she said these words: I have been searching my conscience. I have been developing my consciousness to understand what I'm called to do today by being standing in this line. And I thought that was just a great quote to say why she's there and why she's participating. So we're going to continue to have these discussions and issues as we go forward. We're out of time for now. But as always, I want everyone, please stay safe, be well, and until we see each other next time, peace, power, and love.